The room was silent, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. John Hartman stood at the edge of the colonel's vast, cluttered office, his eyes scanning the walls covered in Elvis's photos, the posters, and the gold records. The elephant's foot trash basket loomed large in the corner, and the framed certificates behind the colonel's desk seemed to mock him. He took a deep breath, knowing what was about to happen, the squeak of the horn. It was the colonel's way of summoning his team, a sound that sent a shiver down the spine of anyone who heard it. John and the others would have to run, no matter what they were doing. They knew the rules of the game, but no one ever got used to the sudden panic it caused. Suddenly, the horn squeaked. "Move," someone shouted, and the office erupted into a flurry of activity. John sprinted to the colonel's office, his heart pounding. He wasn't the only one. Tom Diskin, the colonel's right-hand man, was already there, his face a mask of professionalism. Jim O'Brien, the efficient and no-nonsense private secretary, was right behind him. Irving Schechter, the former mailroom boy from William Morris, skidded to a stop, and Grellan Landon, the genial publicist, followed closely. They all stood at attention, waiting for the colonel to speak. He was a commanding presence, a man who had built an empire around a single star, Elvis Presley. The colonel's eyes scanned his team, and for a moment no one dared to breathe. "Good, good," the colonel said, his voice deep and authoritative. "Now, listen up. We've got a new deal to close, and it's a big one. We need to make sure everything is perfect. No mistakes, no slip-ups. Do you understand?" Everyone nodded, their eyes fixed on the colonel. He was the master of the game, the one who kept everyone on their toes. The tension in the room was palpable, and John knew that this was just the beginning. The colonel's office was more than just a place of work. It was a shrine to Elvis. Every wall, every corner, was a testament to the king of rock and roll. But it was also a battlefield, a place where deals were made and reputations were built. The colonel was a shrewd businessman, and he knew how to play the game better than anyone. He began to lay out the details of the new deal, his voice calm and calculated. John listened intently, trying to absorb every word. The colonel was known for his elaborate schemes, his ability to get what he wanted. He didn't just sell Elvis to the public. He sold Elvis to the people who sold the public. It was a complex, intricate process, and John was still learning the ropes. But one thing was clear. The colonel was a master of psychology. He knew exactly how to manipulate people, how to make them feel important, and how to get them to do his bidding. He had built a team around Elvis, a team that included everyone from top executives to his own family. They all played a role in the colonel's grand plan, and they all knew that the colonel was the one calling the shots. As the colonel continued to speak, John couldn't help but think about the stories he had heard. The colonel was a legend, a man who could make deals that seemed impossible. He had a way of making people feel like they owed him, even when they were the ones getting the better end of the bargain. It was a delicate balance, and the colonel was the only one who could pull it off. The room was filled with the colonel's memorabilia, a visual representation of his success. But to John, it was more than that. It was a reminder of the power of the colonel's vision, a vision that had made Elvis a global sensation. The colonel was more than just a manager. He was a mastermind, a man who had created a phenomenon. And now John was part of that phenomenon. He was part of the team that kept the machine running, that kept Elvis on top. The pressure was immense, but John wouldn't let it show. He was here to learn, to be part of something bigger than himself. The colonel's voice broke through his thoughts. "Now I want everyone to get to work. This deal is crucial, and we can't afford any mistakes. Got it?" They all nodded again, and the colonel dismissed them with a wave of his hand. As they filed out of the office, John couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was the colonel's world, and he was a part of it. The game had just begun, and he was ready to play. The colonel, Elvis's manager, was a man who liked to make an entrance. He'd walk into the Morris offices, where everyone was dressed sharp and cool, carrying a big hand-tooled leather valise that looked like a souvenir from Phoenix. The office was full of guys in dark suits, talking about big movie stars and money, and when Parker walked in, they all just fell apart. He was the opposite of what they expected, with his socks always falling down and his disheveled look. John, one of Elvis's friends, said the colonel liked to have him drive him around in his old, beat-up convertible. The car had holes in the top, and when they'd pass by studio executives, the Colonel would reach out through a tear in the roof, shake hands, and say, "Hello, how are you? How do you like my new car?" It was all part of his act. The Colonel was also very good at handling Elvis's fan club. He made sure every piece of fan mail was answered, even when it was thousands of letters a day. He had a system where he'd collect letters from different studios and send them back to his office in Madison to be answered. He even organized a huge Christmas mailing, sending out cards with a calendar, a postcard, a letter, and a little propeller toy to over 1 million fans. He did it all at once, just to surprise the mail room at Paramount. The Colonel wasn't just about showmanship, he also helped other people in the business. When Sonny and Cher were struggling, he gave their managers advice on how to negotiate better deals. He even helped the Beatles with their security when they were mobbed by fans. The Colonel had already figured out how to handle such situations when Elvis was touring in the 1950s. He was also very charitable. He donated money to start the Country Music Association's Museum and Hall of Fame. When his friend Oscar Davis had a stroke, the Colonel promised to send him $100 a month for the rest of his life. He even sent Minnie Pearl a big check each Christmas for her charity to help unwed mothers. At MGM, the Colonel was always ready to move if he had any problems with the studio. He'd organize moving drills, where everything Elvis owned had to be packed and ready to go in just 20 minutes. He'd shout, "Everybody ready to move," and the team would respond, "Yes, sir." Over the years, Elvis's name was linked with many women, but most of them were just rumors. Priscilla Beaulieu, however, was different. She had been living at Graceland for a while, and as she grew up, she and Elvis started wearing matching rings. In January 1967, Elvis's cousin Brenda Smith received flowers signed by both Elvis and Priscilla, a sign that their relationship had become serious. On April 30th, the Colonel sent telegrams to his closest friends, asking them to meet at the airport. They were told to bring trusted photographers and to go to Las Vegas. No one knew why, but the Colonel was known for his secrets. The next morning, Elvis and Priscilla arrived in Las Vegas from Palm Springs in Frank Sinatra's private plane. They went to the Clark County Courthouse to get married, and then to the Aladdin Hotel to prepare for the wedding. The wedding ceremony was simple and traditional, held in a private suite at the Aladdin. Only a few close friends and family were there, including Elvis's two best men, Joe Esposito and Marty Lacker. After the ceremony, there was a big breakfast with a huge wedding cake and a string trio playing "Love Me Tender." The press was there too, and Elvis had to answer questions about why he decided to get married. He was nervous but happy. After the wedding, Elvis and Priscilla went on a short honeymoon to Palm Springs and then returned to Graceland. Elvis had also bought a ranch near Memphis, which he called the Circle G, where he could ride horses and have some privacy. When they got back to Los Angeles, Elvis had to deal with the changes in his inner circle. Some of his friends were upset about the marriage, and he had to make some tough decisions about who would stay and who would go. The wedding marked a new chapter in Elvis's life, and the changes in his personal and professional life were just beginning. Elvis and Priscilla moved into their new home at 1174 Hillcrest Road in Trousdale Estates, a fancy neighborhood in Southern California. The house was perched on a hill, offering a stunning view of the city when the smog cleared. It was huge with 4 big bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, and a large living room with a bar. The house was built in a French Regency style, and it had a huge pool and a brick patio with electric gates. The previous owner had spent a lot of money making it look perfect, and Elvis bought it for $400,000. Elvis's life was changing. He was now a family man, but his career wasn't. He was still getting offers for movies that weren't very good, and his music wasn't as popular as it used to be. He hadn't had a #1 hit in over 5 years. Most of his recent hits were from old movies, and they weren't as exciting as his early music. In June, Elvis started working on a new movie called Speedway. It was another typical Elvis movie where he played a race car driver who gets into trouble with the IRS. The movie was full of the same old scenes: Elvis driving, Elvis singing, and Elvis getting into fights. It wasn't very exciting, and even Elvis seemed bored. His friends said he would play pranks on the set to keep things interesting. They would throw water balloons, pies, and even cherry bombs at each other. It was all in good fun, but it showed how much Elvis was struggling with the repetitive nature of his work. Despite the tedium, Elvis was happy because Priscilla was pregnant. He was over the moon and talked about it all the time. He wanted a baby so much that he would even act gentle with children on the set. Bill Bixby, who starred in Speedway with Elvis, noticed how content he seemed. Elvis would whistle and hum, and he looked thinner and more relaxed. In September, Elvis got into a fight with a former yardman at Graceland. The man was trying to get his job back, but Elvis's father, Vernon, told him it wasn't available. The yardman got angry and came back to Graceland later, drunk and cursing. Elvis said the man swung at him, but missed, and Elvis knocked him down with one punch. Elvis's next movie, Stay Away Joe, was different. He played a Navajo Indian who returns to his reservation with some cows and a bull. The idea was to improve the reservation, but Elvis's character ends up selling the cows and buying plumbing instead. It was a more grown-up role, and Elvis was excited about it. He said he wanted to grow up on the screen and do more acting than singing. After finishing Stay Away Joe, Elvis went back to Memphis to oversee an auction at his ranch. He sold a lot of old things like guitars, doors, and a blue bathtub, and raised over $100,000. He gave the money to charity as he did every year. Elvis was known for his generosity. He would often give away cars and rings, and he contributed to many local charities, especially during Christmas. He even bought a yacht and donated it to a children's hospital. Elvis was also becoming more religious. He released an album of spiritual songs called How Great Thou Art, which was played on radio stations across the country. He was showing a softer side, and people started to see him as a good, polite, and patriotic man. By this time, Elvis was a millionaire and a family man. He was even appearing on best-dressed lists. The people who used to criticize him, like Hedda Hopper, were now praising him. But some thought he had become too bland, too much a part of the establishment. Despite the changes, Elvis was still Elvis, and he was determined to keep growing and improving, both in his personal life and in his career. Elvis and Priscilla were excited as the big day approached. On February 1st, 1968, they got into a blue Cadillac and headed to Baptist Memorial Hospital. Charlie Hodge drove, and a black Cadillac followed, just in case. The hospital was swarming with reporters, but Elvis and Priscilla managed to get inside. Priscilla was admitted, and 2 off-duty policemen were stationed at the entrance to the maternity ward to keep fans away. Elvis waited in the doctor's lounge with his friends and family. They were all anxious and eager to hear the good news. After 8 long hours at 5:01 p.m., their baby girl was born. She weighed 6 pounds 15 ounces and was named Lisa Marie. Elvis and Priscilla had chosen the name from a baby book, though some said it was inspired by the Colonel's wife, Marie. Vernon and Dee were sent to tell the reporters the news. Elvis sent one of his friends to buy cigars and called his grandmother, who was bedridden at Graceland. He also tried to reach the Beaulieus in California. Finally, he went to see his newborn daughter. Priscilla stayed in the hospital for 4 days, and guards were posted outside her room to keep the fans at bay. She had a closed-circuit TV near by so she could watch her baby in the nursery. The hospital received calls from all over the world, and at Graceland, thousands of cards and gifts arrived. A few weeks after Lisa Marie was born, Elvis started filming his next movie, Live a Little, Love a Little. It was a light-hearted film, where Elvis played a photographer. The script included more mature language and scenes, which was a big change from his previous films. Elvis seemed to be maturing, and he told a writer, "I think you have to mature a little bit." Elvis's next film, Charo, was even more different. He wore a greasy leather outfit, had a scruffy beard, and didn't sing. The film advertised him as a different kind of man. In The Trouble with Girls and How to Get Into It, Elvis appeared halfway through the movie and got into some mild romantic situations. Despite these changes, the film wasn't very good. The biggest change for Elvis in 1968 came in the form of a TV special. The Colonel announced that NBC would produce a 1-hour special and a movie. Elvis's films were becoming less popular, and this move was a way to keep his career going. Steve Binder, who had directed shows like Hullabaloo, was chosen to direct the special. He wanted to create a show that would show Elvis's true self, not just what the Colonel wanted. there were many disagreements with the Colonel. Steve wanted Elvis to talk more and sing fewer Christmas songs, while the Colonel wanted a traditional Christmas show. Steve and Bones Howe, the music producer, fought for creative control. They wanted to use new songs and extra musicians, which the Colonel didn't like. There were also battles over the soundtrack album and the use of Elvis's music. Steve wanted to tell a story about a young man leaving home and his adventures. One scene involved Elvis entering a bordello, but it was edited out. Steve also decided to remove the Christmas song, which made the Colonel furious. Despite the conflicts, the Colonel let the show go ahead. Elvis was more relaxed during the meetings. Steve and Bones discovered that Elvis wanted to be part of the current music scene. They decided to have Elvis wear a black leather suit and surround him with his old friends during rehearsals. The Jordanaires couldn't join, but Scotty Moore, DJ Fontana, and others were there. They spent a week rehearsing, telling stories and playing music, just like the old days. The atmosphere was electric, and everyone could feel that something special was happening. This TV special would mark Elvis's comeback and show the world a new side of the king. The days leading up to the production of Elvis's 1968 NBC special were intense. The sessions in his dressing room, where Elvis spent hours just being himself, were filled with laughter, stories, and a lot of singing. Elvis and his crew were laid back, and it felt more like a fun hangout than a serious recording session. They sang old classics like Love Me and When My Blue Moon Turns to Gold Again, and it was clear that Elvis was at his most comfortable when he was surrounded by the music and people he loved. Meanwhile, the recording sessions for the production numbers that would make up the second half of the show were more structured. These sessions started in the afternoon and often went well past midnight. Elvis worked with a group of top-notch musicians he knew from his earlier days, including Hal Blaine on drums, Don Randy on piano, and Tommy Tedesco and Mike Deasy on guitars. The atmosphere was electric, and Elvis seemed to thrive in it. He wasn't just singing, he was performing, moving around the stage with the energy of a live show. But the real challenge came when it was time to decide how the show would end. Steve Binder, the show's producer, wanted Elvis to say something meaningful in his goodbye, something that reflected who he was. The Colonel, Elvis's manager, had other ideas. He wanted Elvis to end the show with a Christmas song, which was typical for the season. Steve knew that for Elvis, the ending had to be something special, something that would leave a lasting impression. He turned to Earl Brown, his choral director, and asked him to write a powerful closing song. Earl came through with If I Can Dream, a song that called for peace and understanding. When Elvis heard it, he was moved and agreed to perform it, much to the Colonel's dismay. The Colonel, always the showman, had his own ways of making things interesting. He would play games with Bob Finkel, the show's producer, and other executives, often winning money through his clever tricks. One time, he even sent Finkel home with a case of water, masquerading as expensive champagne, just to see how far he could push the joke. Despite his antics, the Colonel knew how to get things done, and his influence was felt throughout the production. The day of the live taping, Elvis was a bundle of nerves. He hadn't performed in front of a live audience in 8 years, and the thought of it was daunting. But once he stepped onto the stage, all his fears melted away. He was in his element, moving and singing with the passion that made him a legend. The audience, which included Elvis's friends and family, was electrified. The show was a mix of old hits and new energy, and it felt like a return to the early days of rock and roll. After the taping, Elvis was exhausted but elated. He had faced his fears and delivered a performance that was both powerful and personal. The show was a hit, and the album that followed was well received. Critics praised Elvis for his renewed energy and charisma, and it seemed like he had found his way back to the music that defined him. In the months that followed, Elvis's music took a new direction. He released singles like Guitar Man and U.S. Mail, which showed a more mature and reflective side of him. If I Can Dream became a hit, reaching number 12 on the Billboard charts, and it was a sign that Elvis was ready for a comeback. In January 1969, he returned to Memphis to record at Chips Moman's American Recording Studio, a place that felt like home. The studio, though modest, was known for its hit-making magic, and Elvis was eager to tap into that energy. The sessions in Memphis were a homecoming for Elvis. He worked with a talented group of musicians, and the result was a series of recordings that felt fresh and authentic. It was clear that Elvis was on a new path, one that promised to bring him back to the top of the music world. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was gearing up for a major comeback. He had spent 10 days in the studio, recording with a group of talented musicians, many of whom he had known for years. These included Reggie Young, a guitarist, and Bobby Emmons, an organist, who had both played with Bill Black's combo. Bill, unfortunately, had passed away in a car accident. Gene Chrisman, the drummer, had a history with Jerry Lee Lewis, while Bobby Wood, a skilled piano player, had a few hits of his own. Mike Leach, a bassist, had been a regular in local clubs, and Tommy Cogbill, a top guitarist and bassist, was helping with production. To add more depth to the sound, Elvis brought in a brass section and a string section from the Memphis Symphony Orchestra, along with backup singers, including Ronnie Millsap, a white blues singer. Despite having laryngitis for 4 of the 10 days, Elvis managed to record 36 songs, enough for 2 albums and several singles. This was his most productive session ever, and it was clear that he was moving away from the less serious movie soundtrack songs he had been doing. Instead, he focused on a mix of country, blues, ballads, and even a few protest songs. One of the most significant songs from this session was In the Ghetto, written by Mac Davis. Mac had played the song for Elvis months earlier, and it resonated with him, reminding him of his mother. Another standout was Don't Cry, Daddy, which also struck a personal chord with Elvis. Both songs were powerful and emotionally charged, and they helped to reinvigorate his career. After the recording sessions, Elvis and his wife, Priscilla, took a month-long vacation in Aspen, Colorado, where Elvis learned to ski. This break was well-deserved, but the work didn't stop. The movie Charo, released in March, didn't receive much praise, and the single Charo, backed with Memories, barely made it into the top 40. However, the next 2 singles, which included songs from his religious albums and In the Ghetto, were much more successful. In the Ghetto became a hit, reaching number 3 on the charts and selling over 1.5 million copies. Coincidentally, as In the Ghetto was gaining popularity, Elvis was in Hollywood filming Change of Habit, his 31st movie. The plot was unusual, with Elvis playing a doctor who falls in love with a nurse who is actually a nun. The film had its moments, from a speech-impaired patient trying to rape the nun to a nun slugging a cheating grocer. Despite the odd premise, the movie had its fans, and Elvis sang 3 songs in it, sporting a new, longer, and bushier hairstyle. After the film, Elvis and Priscilla went to Honolulu for 2 weeks, then returned to Memphis. Elvis sold the Circle G Ranch and moved the horses back to Graceland. His routine at home was predictable but comfortable. He would wake up in the afternoon, swim, eat breakfast, and then sign autographs for fans at the front gate. Sometimes, when the crowds got too large, he would open the gates so everyone could come in. In the evenings, he would hang out with friends, watch TV, and play pool. Around midnight, he would head downtown to watch movies, a tradition known as the Midnight Movies. On July 5th, Elvis left Graceland for Los Angeles to begin rehearsals for his first live performance in over 8 years. The show was set to take place at the International Hotel in Las Vegas, a massive and modern venue. The hotel, with its 1,519 rooms and world-class amenities, was a fitting stage for Elvis's return. The Colonel, Elvis's manager, had negotiated a lucrative deal, and Elvis was promised $1 million for the engagement. Elvis's band for the show was carefully selected. James Burton, a renowned guitarist, was chosen as the band leader. He had a strong background in country rock and had played with artists like Ricky Nelson. The other band members included Jerry Sheff on bass, Ronnie Tutt on drums, Larry Muhobrak on keyboards, and John Wilkinson on rhythm guitar. The vocalists were the Imperials and the Sweet Inspirations, adding a rich layer of harmony to the performances. Elvis rehearsed with his band for 2 weeks in Los Angeles, working on over 100 songs and narrowing it down to a set list of about 20. He incorporated karate-like moves into his performance, adding a dynamic element to his show. The band then moved to Vegas for another 2 weeks of rehearsals with the backup singers and the hotel's orchestra. On the night of his opening, Elvis stepped onto the stage in the Showroom International, ready to show the world that he was back. The audience was electrified, and Elvis delivered a powerful performance, blending his old hits with new material. It was a night that marked the beginning of a new chapter in Elvis's career, one that would see him reclaim his place as the king of rock and roll. Larry Muhobrak, one of Elvis's band members, was replaced for the upcoming Vegas shows by Glenn D. Hardin. Glenn had a unique perspective on Elvis, saying, "Elvis likes to rehearse himself and hang around with guys and sing. He doesn't just rehearse the songs he's going to perform. He likes to play anything anyone can name. If you start playing Stagger Lee, he'll sing it for an hour and a half just for fun. When you get on stage with him, you feel like you've played every song in the world. He's comfortable, and he knows he can jump into anything." By the time rehearsals were over, Elvis had lost 15 pounds and looked better than ever. The International Hotel was preparing for a big event. Nick Naff, one of the hotel's executives, was nervous. "We were opening a new hotel, and we read all the signs, Barbra Streisand, and was the hottest entertainment property in the world. She just won an Oscar and had 3 movies in the works. Elvis, on the other hand, was an unknown stage act. We weren't sure how it would go, but we knew he'd be a draw. To everyone's surprise, Elvis was a massive hit." The hotel was filled to capacity, with fans coming from all over the world. The opening week was sold out, and the rest of the month was nearly full. The hotel's owner, Kirk Kerkorian, even offered his private plane to fly in critics from major newspapers. The Showroom International was a grand, over-the-top venue with a capacity of 2,000. The decor was a mix of Roman colonnades, Louis XIV figures, and paintings of Greek ruins. The menu offered an indulgent selection of foods and wines. The show began with the Bobby Morris Orchestra, followed by the Sweet Inspirations and Sammy Shore, who kept the crowd laughing with his jokes. Elvis, meanwhile, was backstage, nervous and drumming his fingers against his thighs. When Sammy finished, the band started playing Baby I Don't Care, and Elvis walked onto the stage. The moment he appeared, the crowd erupted into a standing ovation, and he hadn't even sung a note yet. Elvis started with a short version of Blue Suede Shoes, moving and grooving like he did in the 50s. He then introduced himself and the venue with a bit of humor, calling it the Big Freaky International Hotel, with weirdo dolls on the walls and funky angels on the ceiling. He sang Love Me Tender and kissed a few fans at the edge of the stage. Then came a medley of his early hits, including Jailhouse Rock, Don't Be Cruel, Heartbreak Hotel, and All Shook Up. He played with the lyrics, showing a relaxed and playful side. Next he performed Hound Dog, which he used to close his shows in the 50s. He followed it with Memories and then My Babe. The energy in the room was electric, and Elvis's voice was deeper and more sensual than it had been in years. The band and the singers created a tight, soulful rhythm that filled the entire showroom. Elvis then sang In the Ghetto, his latest hit, and Suspicious Minds, which he said would be his next single. The 6-minute version of Suspicious Minds was a showstopper, with Elvis performing with the full orchestra. The crowd was on their feet again, and Elvis was panting but grinning. He then sang Yesterday and Hey Jude, creating a giant sing-along. After Johnny B. Good, he closed with Mystery Train and Tiger Man, and then What I Say, which brought the crowd to a frenzy. For his final song, he sang Can't Help Falling in Love, and the crowd was on its feet once more. The critics were amazed. They praised Elvis for his resilience and his impact on popular music. The hotel extended his contract, raising his salary and guaranteeing him $1 million for 8 weeks of work over the next 5 years. As the month went on, Elvis relaxed and changed his setlist each night. He shared stories about his past, sometimes rambling and sounding a bit out of breath, but always engaging. He performed a mix of old and new songs, and Suspicious Minds always caused the most excitement. Elvis proved that he could still captivate an audience, and that his music was as powerful as ever. The opening night had shown that he wasn't just a curiosity. He was a superstar, and he was here to stay. Elvis's comeback in Las Vegas was nothing short of legendary. People flocked to see him, and the hotels were packed. Despite some people saying it was too soon for him to return, Elvis proved them wrong. By mid-January, almost all the shows were sold out, and the excitement was palpable. Fans flew in and stayed for weeks, just to catch every performance. Elvis wasn't just a show, he was an experience. His second Vegas run was even more relaxed and playful. He tried new songs and even played a few on the piano. Sometimes he'd make the band and the audience laugh with his antics, like unzipping his jumpsuit or teasing women in the crowd. Even when he was sick, he kept the energy high, and the fans loved every minute of it. After Vegas, Elvis took his show to the Astrodome in Houston. It was a massive venue, and the acoustics weren't great, but it didn't matter. The crowd was there for Elvis, and they were going wild. He rode around in a red Jeep, and when he started singing, the place erupted. Despite the challenges, it was a huge success, and Elvis walked away with a cool $1,200,000. The Astrodome shows were important because they showed that Elvis could perform outside Vegas. This opened up the possibility of more concerts and even a tour. Priscilla flew in, and the security was tight as ever. Elvis even picked up some awards, including a gold record and a flashy gold watch. In March, the Colonel announced that Elvis would do a nationwide closed-circuit TV show. It was a big deal, and Elvis would be paid $1 million for a single performance. The concert was set to happen at the Las Vegas Convention Center, and it would be broadcast to 275 cities. Two young promoters, Jim Rismiller and Steve Wolf, were brought in to make it happen. They had a background in television and concerts, and they were excited to work with Elvis. The Colonel, always the shrewd businessman, met with them in his Palm Springs home. The office was filled with mementos and photos, and the atmosphere was casual and friendly. The Colonel's cats would wander in, and the housekeeper would bring cookies and milk. It was a far cry from the glitz and glamour of Vegas, but it was where the magic happened. Elvis's career was on a roll and the future looked bright. He was back on top and the world was watching.